Welcome, everybody. So, next up, we have Steve James, and I
Yeah.
believe today he is speaking on intimacy in the body.
Thank you, Tom. Today we're going to talk about intimacy in the body. And I thought it would be fun to share with you some of the ways that I think about the word embodiment. And I mentioned before, we've got so many different speakers on this in this conference. And no doubt you've already noticed many different sorts of opinions and different emphases, and actually even different definitions of the word embodiment, whether the definitions are stated or not. Um, Very often there's different definitions going on, and sometimes the definitions are contradictory. And embodiment is one of those words that means many different things in different contexts and can justifiably mean different things in different contexts. So, for instance, I can put my coffee on the table, or I can table a motion at a meeting. Both uses of the word table are appropriate, although they're not the same. So this, as we're discussing here, defining the word embodiment and looking at how embodiment works, it's not the gospel truth kind of position or the purest, most correct way of doing it. It's a way of using the word to serve a certain purpose. And so embodiment can sometimes mean, to give some examples that aren't the definition I'm going to offer, it can mean to represent or exemplify something. You could say she embodies the values of this institution, or this football team embodies the spirits of fair play, or something like that. This is sort of represent or exemplify. It can also mean to include or contain something, like the human rights are enshrined in the Constitution, are embodied in the Constitution. You could also say, you hear that phrase, or the meaning of XYZ is embodied in this law, or something like that. And I think a common way that embodiment is defined in the sort of field we're talking about is some sort of state experience, some kind of state experience of wholeness or being in touch, or sometimes a certain feeling of being in touch with oneself, or calmness, or something like this, or aliveness. None of those are the definition that I'm going to offer you today. The definition I'm going to offer was in the meditation, which is embodiment is feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of the body. Embodiment is feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of the body. And the title of this session is Intimacy with the Body. Intimacy with the body. And I just define intimacy, that's a longer conversation, but I define intimacy as feeling what's there to be felt. Feeling what's there to be felt. And when we feel the sensations that reveal the presence of the body, there's a few things implied there. We tend to assume our body is there because it was there the last time we checked. We're aware from our previous experiences that we have a body. And of course, there's always sensory data flowing in from the body that is being generated now. But at the same time, one's experience of the body is a combination of that sensory data and what one remembers from having had a body the last how many years you've been alive. We sort of assume, we make a composite and we assume a lot. So when we're feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of the body, it's sort of pointing to this idea of if you knew nothing about bodies, if you got some sort of Men in Black body-mind wipe, and you could only feel what was being generated by the body at that moment, what would you be feeling? That's sort of the idea here, feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of the body, or feeling the sensations that the body is generating. And so by that definition, embodiment isn't aiming for a particular set of sensations. For instance, a feeling of relief, or a change in sensation, or an aspirational state experience. There's nothing wrong with relief, a change in sensation, and aspirational state experience, but that would be outside of this definition of embodiment. Sometimes I say that there's no informed consent on intimacy, meaning you don't know what you're going to get when you feel. So if you decide to tune into the sensations that reveal the presence of your body, you're going to feel what's there. You're going to feel what's there. It might be pleasant. It might be unpleasant. It could be neutral. It could be more than you expect. It could be less than you expect. The point is you're going to detect what's there There's nothing in this definition of embodiment that says you're going to feel good. You might, but you might not. So in that sense, there's no informed consent on intimacy. You don't know what you're going to get till you get it. And so yes, let me share the screen now. So this is a graph, the beginnings of a graph. And can anyone, well, you can't speak back, I suppose, but I might say to you, can you remember, you can just think in your head, can you remember which is the y-axis and which is the x-axis? Well, I was going to share with you this tremendous way I remembered it when I was a little boy in maths class. There's this guy jumping from the top here, and he's going, yikes, and he's landing, yikes. So it's like y-axis to the x-axis. It's entirely related to embodiment, but it just seems like nugget. This will be the one thing you remember from this entire presentation, of course. Okay. So if we have noise, this is an audio metaphor. So if we think about noise like sound in the environment and over time, and imagine you're at a Kiss concert. The blue line is Kiss. The blue line is the sound that Kiss is generating, the band, this is Kiss, that's generating from the stage, very loud. And the red line is your friend is with you at the concert trying to talk to you in a normal voice. You can't hear what your friend is saying because of the Kiss concert. It's drowning it out. If you want the kind of set point, the noise set point is Kiss, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons and all those guys. So you can't hear what the person's saying. Now, I mentioned that embodiment is not, by this definition, an attempt to generate a particular state experience. I'm totally for generating state experiences, but that would be if you want something else that's not embodiment by this definition. Another thing that embodiment isn't is generating sufficiently loud sensation to puncture or break through whatever ambient noise level there is. So for instance, what are some of the equivalents of Kiss concert? Stress can be that, distraction, stimulation from all sorts of outside sources. There are all sorts of things that can, in a certain sense, drown out the sensations that the body is generating that would be equivalent to a Kiss concert. And here, the voice of your friend is equivalent to the sensations of your body. And if you're at a Kiss concert and you really need to tell someone something, then of course you can go up to their ear and scream into their ear, and probably they'll be able to make out what it is you're saying. But what happens, or rather, that's not a very good strategy for long term or mid to long term. What's going to happen? Your voice is going to get totally burned out, okay? And revving your system so that you puncture with aggressive physical practices, let's say, so that you can finally feel something, pushing, driving, so that you can finally break through a layer of numbness or layer of stress to finally feel something. Ah, yes, finally I'm embodied, is a poor strategy mid to long term. Now, aggressive physical practices are great for all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Could be fitness, or it could just be the sheer thrill and enjoyment of it. So I'm not against aggressive physical practices, but as an embodiment strategy, by this definition, as a way of feeling your body, feeling the sensations that get in touch with, that are generated by your body, it's not a very good long to medium term solution. It tends to create burning out in that way. So there's another option, of course, which is you can leave the Kiss concert and go to the library. Let's go to the library. So now you can see we've gone to the library here over time, and the ambient noise level, the blue line, has gone down. And so now your friend, let's say, has been speaking to you the entire time you've left the Kiss concert, and now suddenly you can hear what it is your friend was saying. The key points here are that this red line was always existing, always going on. Your friend was always speaking to you. Your body was always generating sensations. But at a certain point, there's a way of sensitizing or tuning in, if you like, that reveals what was already there. So this is a sort of lowering the ambient noise level kind of model of embodiment. It's one way of looking at embodiment, but there's another one. We can flip that on its head, actually. And this I learned from my meditation teacher, Shinzen Yang. I've had a few teachers in my life that have been very influential, and one of the most influential is a man called Shinzen Young. He's an American meditation teacher. His name is also Steve, which his meditation name is Shinzen, but his real name is Steve, which of course, as we all know, is the best name. So that's, if you needed any further endorsement than that, then I don't, then I can't help you. And he talks about this idea of sensory clarity as being one of the core attentional skills. But the point is that sensory clarity is subdivided into these two categories of magnification and resolution. Magnification and resolution, now if we go here, you can see that magnification, it's like having a magnifying glass. It's how, in a certain sense, or a microscope. If you use a microscope or a magnifying glass, you begin to see something that was already there, but you couldn't detect it. It was too small or something like that. It was too zoomed out. So there's a way of being able to uncover or reveal something through this idea of magnification. And resolution, that's a television screen. Resolution, as I expect you all know, if you think about watching a YouTube video or Netflix on high resolution, you can see all of the pores of the skin. You can see every beard hair of the glorious moustache and so on. You can see such clearly the distinction between the different shapes and aspects of the image. Whereas a lower resolution image is quite pixelated and muddy. So the point being here, as you begin to develop sensory clarity, or you begin to continue to engage in embodiment practices, and we're going to come to that in a moment, then your sensory clarity will begin to improve, and you'll be able to detect things that you previously hadn't noticed. That's magnification. And also be able to make finer and finer distinctions with the information that you're detecting. That's resolution. So it's these two aspects coming together. We can think, I think, of a wine taster. If I drink wine, I just throw the wine down my throat quickly as possible. It has been alleged. Okay, so that's, but if you have a wine taster, somebody who is initiated into the dark mysteries of Merlot or something like that, they can sip that same wine and they can detect, yes, this is the oaky barrel facing north. There was a squirrel reading Shakespeare in a nearby field. They can detect all of this stuff from tasting this wine, same wine going in, same data, sensory data flowing in between myself and the wine taster. But the wine taster has so much more developed sensory clarity that they're able to detect things I can't detect, magnification. And they're able to make finer and finer distinctions, parsing apart, if you like, the information that's coming in. So this is some things here about the process of embodiment in that way. So if we think then about what it means to practice or to engage in embodiment practices, then here we have a blue line. This is your embodiment at that moment. We have a graph here on the Y and X axis, embodiment over time. This is how embodied you are right now. Okay. And then you do an embodiment practice of some sort. Let's say it's movement practice, or maybe it's the meditation we did at the beginning, sitting quietly and feeling the sensations that your body's generating. Let's just take that as an example. So you do that for 20 minutes or something. You're going to experience a increase in the embodiment, sort of tuning in to those sensations. You're going to feel them probably gradually a little bit more. But it's easy come, easy go, because then you stop doing your meditation and you go off on some other errand or something like this. And gradually your level of embodiment will go back down again to somewhere near your baseline. But if you keep repeating that process again and again, continuing to practice, over a period of time, you can see we still have these spikes, which are when you're practicing, and the dips when you're not practicing, but something is happening at the same time, as well as a temporary increase in embodiment, which is you could say your ability to feel the sensations that your body's generating. You're also engendering an increase in your baseline of embodiment. Your baseline of embodiment. Baseline, by that I mean how embodied you are when you're not trying to be embodied, when you're not deliberately trying to be embodied. So in that sense, if you looked at it day by day, doing a little bit of embodiment practice each day, if you were doing that, of course, you'd notice fluctuations in how much you could feel your body, but over time, you'd be walking around more embodied, even when you weren't deliberately tuning in or deliberately doing a practice or deliberately something like this. You'd have that improved baseline. Successful application of embodiment techniques tends to improve embodiment during the practice session and improve baseline embodiment over time. That's the summary sentence there. Okay, so make a couple of points about why. And, like I said, guys, this is just some of my thoughts about embodiment, the way I like to work with this theme. I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours, and I've got lots and lots of graphs because I love graphs. I love the visual representation. So this is just a bit of a window, I suppose, into a little bit the way I like to think about it. So why would you want to be embodied? Now, there's many different reasons. And I'm not going to go into and exhaust it. This is a whole talk in itself, really. So I'll just give you 2 or 3, really. Comes to mind. Richness of life. Richness of life, which means basically becoming more in touch with the sensations of your body. It's like discovering a whole new wing in your house that you were previously unaware of, something like that. There's a richness there. There's a realm of experience and a realm of sensation and enjoyment that's possible there. And very often I've heard people who begun to become more embodied, engaging in embodiment practices, really become quite fascinated and delighted by what they experience there. And there's also a sense in which there are ways in which I don't have time to talk about at the moment, but there are ways in which becoming more acquainted with the way your body operates, the way sensations operate, the way emotions operate in the body, can also reduce, in a certain sense, the internal friction of when negative states go through or unhappy states go through or something like this. Very often, when you begin to penetrate the mysteries of the body, one of the benefits it can give you is a sense of insight and understanding, which is the second one here, into the way things work. And very often, like many things in life, when you start to understand how the mechanisms work, you, like in The Wizard of Oz, pull back the curtain and you see what's pulling the levers. It actually can be quite relieving. So there's a sense in which the richness of life is both a greater capacity to savor and enjoy the positive, so to say, sensations, but also there's an aspect of it that by getting to know, counterintuitively perhaps, some of the difficulties that one might experience in terms of one's body and emotions and et cetera, there can also be a reduction of friction, inner friction in that sense. And so one can achieve an insight or achieve insights into oneself and by definition others. And this goes from the very prosaic sorts of insights, which is things like, when I spend too much time on Facebook, my body gets stressed, something like that. That's not an insignificant insight to discover the causes that impact your body, to be able to see kind of almost in real time, or at least very near to it, the impacts of your environment, certain people, certain conversations, certain input you might be taking in on your bodily state. Lots of people can't do that. Lots of people, it takes them days, weeks to track what it is that made them feel like that. People perhaps transgressing your boundaries, or you compromising yourself in all sorts of ways in relationships, for instance, can happen that you don't really realize. You don't feel the sting. You don't feel the body's reaction at the time because you're just not in touch with that. And so it can be very useful for navigation, better navigation, which means decision-making, essentially, navigation. We mentioned before with sensory clarity, you're getting more information, magnification, and also better quality information with the resolution. You're making better distinctions with it. That, of course, like anyone knows who's watched any spy movies or any kind of war movies and so on, data is very vital to making decisions. And so I think of it sometimes as bringing the sensations of your body to your board of advisors, your inner board of advisors. You can imagine perhaps that there's a round table inside of you, and there are different seats at that table. And there's perhaps your childhood patterning there, there's your conscious mind, there's your education, there's all these different, in other words, aspects and thinking, logical, reasoning mind, etc., that are contributing, if you want, to the decisions you're making, helping you navigate your way through the world. And bringing the sensations of your body to that board of advisors is very useful. the body can provide a different slant on things, different kind of information, different category of reading, if you like, to situations. That's the sort of place very often where people feel a hunch, but not only a hunch, also a feeling of, well, feeling of threat, a feeling of warmth, friendliness, etc. All of these are tonal readings of people and of situations and opportunities. Now, some people, of course, when they begin to bring the body to their table of advisors, their board of advisors, of course, what can happen is there can become a dictatorship of the body. You've never really listened to your body, and now every little creak and every little itch suddenly becomes some sort of a dictatorship. The body jumps onto the middle of the round table and demands to be finally listened to, and listened to all the time, and that's it. The last word is sort of people can't get out of bed without their green juice and things like that. That is a developmental stage that one can go through. Pendulum swings a little bit in the other way, becoming too sensitive. There are times when it's very good to override the body. Times when it's very good to override the body. When you don't want to get up in the morning, but you have to. Those are good times to override the body. Or when you need to keep on running away from whatever it is and you feel like stopping, it's a time to override the body. I mean, it's good to be able to do that, but it's important to feel the body as well, to know when you're overriding, to know why you're overriding, etc. So it's not a dictatorship of the body here. It's bringing it to become a part of your board of decision-making advisors inside of yourself. And this is the part I'm going to be the lightest on, just so we have time for some questions. Which is how to become more embodied, and simply put, by feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of your body. That's essentially it. I make a distinction between embodiment practices and embodying practices. Embodiment practices are practices that are primarily designed or primarily engaged in with a certain view to sensitize you to the sensations of the body. Certain kinds of meditation are a good example. Certain kinds of movement practices are a good example, because their primary objective or outcome is to sensitize you to the sensations of the body. Now, every practice has secondary and tertiary effects also. If you're sitting there feeling the sensations of the body, maybe you're really focusing on that sensitizing part, the sensory clarity part, but you're also getting some benefits in terms of concentration. You may not be really emphasizing that in the way you're approaching it, but just simply by focusing on this body and coming back to it again and again, you're developing some concentration power. You also will eventually, I mentioned this idea of friction, get a sense of a capacity. Generally, this is generally the case over time, a capacity to be with or to feel various states in the body without push or pull or capping. That includes pleasurable states and also states of difficulty and discomfort. So the point being that these are secondary or tertiary benefits of an embodiment practice. Now, embodying practices are practices in which the primary objective or outcome is not to sensitize to the feeling of the body. But it doesn't mean that you're not also going to be getting in touch with the feeling of the body as a secondary or tertiary effect. I can think of certain examples, say strength training, for example, or distance running. There, the primary, if you like, focus is to do with certain performance outcomes or fitness outcomes. That's the main goal there. But it's not to say that if you engage in those activities, you're not also going to get secondary effects of becoming more embodied and so on. So I make that distinction myself between embodiment practices, primarily about or focused on embodiment, feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of the body, and practices that embody you as a secondary or tertiary effect. All right. So I think that's all I've got to say about that today. This is just a bit of a window into the way I like to think about these things. If you have any questions, I think we can take those now. Okay, Dennis is asking.
On the chat.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Specific meditation practices to enhance awareness of the body, yeah. This is an interesting topic because you have many different possibilities here. But generally speaking, most broadly speaking, if you're focusing on the sensations of the body, if you're tuning into the sensations of the body, I'd say that would be the optimal kind of meditation practice to be doing if you want to focus on that specifically. There's so many different meditation styles, right? You can, meditating on mantras or just having a totally open awareness, not focusing on anything at all, etc. And there are lots of meditations that focus on the sensations of the body. A cool distinction, which I also learned from Shinzen, is that you can have three general options when you're working with, let's say, the body. Three focus options. One is global, that is to say, feeling the whole body at the same time. The other is local. Local is a deliberate directing of your attention. For instance, you might zone in on the pain in your knee, or the feeling of happiness in your chest, or the itchiness in your nose. That would be local because you're deliberately honing in on a particular place within your focus range of the body. Also in that category would come body sweeping techniques. Any of you who've done a Goenka retreat, for instance, will be familiar with this idea of sweeping the body up and down, forward and back, spirals, whatever is the case. The point is that you're deliberately moving your attention through the body. Or there's the third option, where you allow your attention to move as it does around the focus range, within the focus range of the body, but you're not deliberately moving it. So maybe you're drawn, so attention goes to the knee, and then maybe it goes to your nose, and then maybe it goes to your chest. The point is that it's free floating in the sense that it moves around willy-nilly, if you want, without you attempting to control that. And then wherever it lands, you soak in to whatever the sensations are. So those are three broad ways of working, but there's so much variety in meditation techniques. And of course, there's all kinds of movement techniques. Michaela Boehm's nonlinear movement method is an excellent way of moving, and that connects you to the body and connects you to the sensations of the body as well. Most movement practices are not, I would say, embodiment practices. They're embodying practices by that definition I gave earlier. They're doing something at the same time as you're getting some embodiment benefits in the process. But not all of them, it depends. Any more questions?
May I ask one more question?
Sure.
When we went past the labeling, from the awareness to the labeling to a general kind of sensation, this was, and I think it might be for the overwhelming majority of people who are so out of touch with their body, and just the sort of general opening up to this kind of vague, there is this energy here, but I can't even begin to associate that with a particular state or a feeling. There's just sort of like, oh, there's just sort of this very puzzling in a way. Yeah, I am the embodiment of certain energy. How do you work with that? I mean, in terms of even developing a kind of dialogue, an initial dialogue of discovery of your own personal energy. Does that question even make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, there's two things I'd want to say about that. The first is that distinctions arise over time. And much like the wine tasting example, or learning a foreign language, the stream of a foreign speaker, the sounds that they make is unintelligible. You've got no way of really relating it to anything conceptually because you don't know the language. Over time, distinctions arise. Distinctions don't need to arise. The sensations that the body generates don't need to be labeled and categorized. That was part of the meditation, actually. It is sufficient to contact them. But generally what happens is patterns are noticed, conceptual links are made. That tends to happen over time, much like learning a language or wine tasting. I also mentioned, and I don't know if I emphasize this point enough, that when you do tune into the feelings of the body, you're going to feel what's there. So you might not feel very good. If your body doesn't feel very good, you may not feel very good. One of the reasons people are disconnected from their body, there are lots of good reasons to be disconnected from the body. And one of those reasons is because sometimes it hurts. So people with a lot of trauma, for instance, very often have difficulty feeling the body. That's because there's a lot of pain in there. And so a titrated or gradual approach with trauma therapist or some sort of situation like that is very smart to cope with and work with and integrate what's coming up. It's not always a rosy, happy situation when you plunge into the depths of what you're feeling. Now, for many people, that's not an issue. It's quite safe. Yeah, you have negative states, and you have maybe difficult memories from the past. It's all very well and easy to cope with. Basically speaking, it may be a rough ride from time to time. But for those with trauma and significant trauma, it can actually be very, very difficult. So I'm, in a certain sense, not saying, let's all get embodied. It's great all the time. You're going to feel so much better. It's so wonderful. You're going to feel, and I did make this point, that there's no informed consent with intimacy. You're going to feel what's there to be felt, whatever it is. It's like a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump said. So there is that. There is that. And Dennis is saying, unwrapping that takes courage. It certainly does. It takes a lot of courage. And I have a lot of respect for people who engage in that process. Steve's saying, so caution about encouraging everyone to be more embodied. Am I cautioning it? Well, crossing the road has its risks. Crossing the street to buy groceries has its risk factors. Lifting weights in a gym has its risk factors. Every time you get out of bed in the morning, there's a certain risk, So I don't know about, am I cautioning? I suppose I'm advocating for an understanding of the possible risks in a certain sense, and then people can make an informed decision. I certainly don't, that's what I'm doing, I think. It's sort of, yes, there are risks. If you sit down to meditate and feel the sensations of the body, it's not always going to be fun and pleasant. But then very few things in life are. I think probably statistically, for the majority of people, I have no basis in saying that, so let me not just make unsubstantiated statistical claims. But in my, if you want experience, most people are okay with it most of the time. But then how will you know if you are or not? Well, that's something, So if you're ever concerned, I think it's good to pursue it with some therapeutic oversight, perhaps, or teacher who's facilitator who's aware of such things. Are there specific embodiment practices that are more suited for men? No, I don't think so. I think embodiment is on the level of human being, which is a category before the branching off into whatever men, women, and whatever various different categories there may be. I think embodiment is a sort of a human thing. And maybe some sexual and tantric practices, Mark is saying. Well, certainly sexuality is an area of, it's certainly an exploration of, an area of exploration that involves the body very heavily. So certainly there's quite a bit of overlap there. Sexuality is often, would maybe have embodying effects. Not too many people engage in sexuality as a way of contacting the sensations of their body. Sometimes I think some solo practices, you could certainly do that with masturbation, for instance, sensual practices that one does by oneself. You could certainly do those with a view to contacting the range of sensations in the body. And then very often what can happen is one begins to open up a whole vista, if you want, of possible sensations. Rather than just being not aroused, quite aroused, very aroused, orgasm, there's a whole range, actually, when you apply sensory clarity of magnification and resolution to something like sexual pleasure and sexual feeling, for sure. So that can be unlocked, and it's very worthwhile, I would say. That's part of the richness, I think, of life. Benefit, if you like, or outcome of embodiment. But most of the time when people are having sex, there's also that, I would say, perhaps primarily to do with the intimacy between two people. And there, you're not only feeling the sensations that your body is generating, you're also feeling the sensations that your partner is generating, both visually, somatically, etc. And that's part of, I think, the richness of sexual engagement, is that that's a whole other sensory universe in your partner and in the meeting of the two people, the engaging of the two people coming together. It's a very special situation, but I don't think you need me to tell you that sex is special and amazing. Can be indeed. Or Steve. Thanks everyone for listening. It was a real pleasure to come here and share my geeky graphs with you. And talk about embodiment the way I like to think about it. Oh yeah, Tom's putting my site down there. I should mention that. Yeah. GuruViking.com is my site. We're doing, right now in the pandemic, we're doing Wednesdays. We do free 1 hour meditation club thing where we get together and talk about meditation and practice. This Sunday, we've got a 3 hour workshop all to do with compassion practices, to do with meditation, etc. We've got embodiment trainings. We've got loads of stuff. Podcast, tons of good things happening at guruviking.com. Dennis is saying, come and do a half-day workshop. I would love to. A pleasure, guys. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Steve, for a great session. I got a number of comments on how great this was,
Thank you.
your good sense of humor.